Ethan Ray thought his war ended years ago. But inside an old asylum, one bark from his therapy dog changed everything, unearthing a hidden truth about the woman he lost and the promise he'd forgotten to keep. Like and subscribe if you believe some wounds can still heal, and share where you're watching from. The gray light of early morning filtered through the dusty blinds of the Evergreen Rehabilitation Center in upstate Montana. The old building used to be a military convalescence ward during the Vietnam era, now turned into a rehabilitation center for veterans who'd seen too much, said too little, and came back carrying ghosts no one else could see. Ethan Ray had arrived 2 weeks ago, sent by his son after a panic attack at the grocery store. Too many sounds, too many voices, too many aisles he couldn't find his way through. Now, he sat in the corner of the recreation room, a broad-shouldered man of 52 who looked like someone had scraped the color out of his eyes. His hair had gone steel gray before its time. His hands shook just enough to betray the effort it took to keep them still. He hadn't spoken to anyone since he arrived. The nurses thought he was mute. The other veterans thought he was stubborn. Only one person, or rather, one creature, had managed to pull a word from him, a German shepherd named Scout. Scout had been brought to the center as part of the therapy dog program. Most dogs were gentle, soft-eyed, eager to please. Scout was different. His eyes were gold alert, almost military. He walked into Ethan's room without hesitation, sat beside the bed, and simply waited. When Ethan looked down, their eyes met like two soldiers recognizing each other after a long silence. That was when Ethan spoke the first words in weeks. "You smell like smoke." He muttered, voice low, almost a confession. The nurse, thinking he was disoriented, tried to correct him. "He's clean, Mr. Ray. We just groomed him." Ethan didn't answer. His gaze lingered on the dog as if he were seeing something only he understood. Later, when he was alone, he whispered again, "You smell like smoke, the same kind that took her." Every night he dragged the same chair to the far corner of his room, where an old wall stood half peeling, its plaster cracked, like the dry skin of the desert he once fought in. He'd rest his hand against it and say softly, "That's where she was. I promised I'd come back for her." No one knew who she was. The staff assumed it was his late wife Mary, and their rumors had turned fragments into a story about a house fire 6 years earlier. Ethan had never forgiven himself for not being home that night. Sometimes, when the night nurse peeked in, she'd find Scout lying right beside him, pressed close eyes fixed on the wall as if guarding something invisible. There were other veterans there, men who screamed in their sleep, who stared at blank TVs, who prayed to comrades already buried, but none of them sat that still, that haunted. One evening, a young nurse named Lena asked him, trying to sound casual, "Mr. Ray, why do you sit by that wall?" He didn't answer at first. Then, without turning, he said quietly, "Because that's where I stopped hearing her voice." The way he said it made her shiver. Later, in the staff lounge, Lena told another nurse, "He talks like she's trapped in there." The other nurse shrugged. PTSD makes them see things, hear things. But Lena wasn't so sure. The next morning, Ethan refused to join group therapy. When asked why, he simply pointed at the wall and whispered, "It's quiet today." He then added, almost to himself, "Maybe she's resting." Scout nudged his hand and let out a low, mournful sound. The kind of sound dogs make when they recognize grief deeper than their understanding. Ethan smiled faintly. "You get it, don't you, buddy? We were both supposed to bring them home." In that fragile moment, the silence of the building felt heavier, almost alive. Outside, the wind carried the faint smell of rain, and Ethan's eyes softened not with hope, but with the ache of remembering something worth missing. Lena watched from the doorway, the light cutting a line across his face. He looked like a man holding a conversation with the past through a wall that refused to answer. The cafeteria smelled of overcooked eggs and instant coffee, the kind that left a film on the tongue. Veterans shuffled in and out, dragging their slippers on linoleum that had seen more trauma than polish. Ethan sat at the far end of the room, his tray untouched. He was used to the quiet. It was his only constant. Scout lay under the table, chin resting on his paws, eyes half closed but watchful. The other men, grizzled, scarred, loud in the way people are when silence scares them, like to fill the air with jokes that bit too close to pain. "He's back to talking to the wall again," one of them said, snickering. "Guess his war never ended, huh?" Another chimed in. "Maybe the wall talks back. Maybe that's his squad." Ethan didn't look up. He'd learned long ago that silence could be armor. Still, something shifted beneath the table. Scout rose slow and deliberate and stepped forward until he stood between Ethan and the others. He didn't bark, didn't bare his teeth. He simply stood there, tail-stiff, muscles taut, the faintest rumble low in his chest. It was enough. The room quieted. The men muttered something about crazy dogs and turned away. Ethan reached down, resting his hand on Scout's neck. "Easy," he murmured. The dog's breathing slowed his body, easing though his eyes never left the table of men. After they were gone, Ethan whispered, "You don't have to guard me from words, buddy." Scout blinked once as if disagreeing. Later that day, Lena found Ethan in the corridor, his hand pressed to the same patch of wall he always touched. She had meant to ask him about his therapy session, but hesitated. He was murmuring something under his breath, the same sentence again and again. That's where she was. I promised I'd come back for her. Lena's curiosity finally broke through her restraint. "Who's on the other side of that wall, Mr. Ray?" she asked gently. For a moment, Ethan didn't seem to hear her. Then his voice came rough and slow, as if dragged through gravel. "My wife," he said. "She burned on duty, right there." The words made Lena shiver. She glanced at the wall, at the uneven plaster, the faint discoloration that looked suspiciously like old smoke stains. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, though the phrase felt small against the weight of his grief. Ethan nodded, once eyes distant. "They said she was gone before I got here," he added, "but I can still feel her. Some nights, when the wind comes through that crack, I swear it smells like her shampoo, lavender and antiseptic." Lena didn't know what to say. She'd read his file. His wife, Mary Ray, had died 6 years ago in a hospital fire. But the part that wasn't in the file, what Ethan had never said, was that this building had been the same hospital before it was shut down, renovated, and reopened as the Evergreen Center. The coincidence unsettled her. That night, she went to the records room, flipping through faded documents from the building's old days. The heading on one file made her pause. 1971, Veterans Medical Unit Fire Incident Report. She traced the name of the ward, and her stomach turned when she read it. South wing, same corridor Ethan's room occupied now. The report said the cause was electrical. 12 casualties. One listed as Mary Ray, volunteer nurse, remains unrecovered. Lena stared at the page, her fingers trembling. When she returned to the ward, Ethan was asleep, his hand still pressed to the wall as if he'd drifted off mid-prayer. Scout was awake, though. He lifted his head and watched her with those amber eyes that seemed to see too much. Lena crouched down, whispering, "You can smell her too, can't you?" The dog tilted his head slightly, then rested his muzzle against the base of the wall, breathing in slow, steady pulls. The hallway light flickered once, a soft hum filling the silence. Lena straightened, unsettled. She told herself it was just the wiring, that old buildings made strange noises at night. But when she looked back, she saw Ethan stir lips moving without sound, the same words repeating in the dark. That's where she was. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the faintest trace of something burnt and sweet. The next morning, the smell of disinfectant mixed with the faint sweetness of instant oatmeal filled the hallways. Group therapy began at 9 sharp, as it always did, with the same folding chairs arranged in a tired circle. Ethan sat near the window, his hands clasped tight between his knees, eyes fixed somewhere far beyond the wall. Scout lay beside him, head resting on his boots, breathing slow and heavy. Lena sat across the room, pretending to review her clipboard, though her attention never strayed far from him. The facilitator, Dr. Hamlin, asked each veteran to share a safe memory, something simple, something from before the war. The room filled with hesitant stories, fishing trips, baseball games, first cars, the smell of rain on desert sand. When it came to Ethan, he hesitated, then said quietly, "I used to carry a camera. Thought I'd be a photographer when I got out." His voice cracked slightly on the last word as if he no longer believed in getting out. The doctor smiled gently, encouraging him to continue. But before Ethan could say more, the wail of a distant siren cut through the morning calm. It was faint, far away, but to Ethan, it was the sound of everything he had tried to bury. His shoulders went rigid, his jaw locked, his eyes glazed as if the present had been replaced by flame. Scout's head snapped up, ears erect, a low growl building in his chest. Ethan Lena's voice broke through the hum of the siren. He didn't respond. His breathing grew shallow, fast, uneven. The siren wailed again, louder this time, and Scout barked sharply once, twice, as though calling him back from somewhere dangerous. The room froze. Dr. Hamlin started to rise, but Lena shook her head eyes on Ethan. She crouched in front of him and said softly, "It's not Fallujah, Mr. Ray. You're safe." The word hung in the air, heavy and fragile. Ethan blinked hard, the sound of the siren fading into the distance. Sweat beaded on his temple, his hands trembling. "Safe?" he echoed, voice hollow. "That's what I told them too." He stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor, and walked out, Scout following close behind. Later, in the dim light of the records room, Lena pulled Ethan's file again, unable to shake what she'd seen. She flipped past medical charts until she found the military section. His record was thick with commendations. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, multiple service citations, and then one notation nearly illegible but underlined twice, Combat Medic Fallujah Fire Incident 2004. She read the summary, her breath catching. Unit under mortar attack. Fire in civilian structure. Subject, Ray rescued 4 soldiers and 2 civilians. Final entry, attempted extraction of Nurse Mary Ray, unsuccessful. Casualty confirmed. Lena leaned back in the chair, staring at the file, the pieces beginning to connect in ways she didn't want them to. She glanced toward the door, half expecting to see him there, but only Scout's shadow passed by, pacing restlessly. Outside, she found Ethan sitting under the oak tree, the sky the color of ash. He was staring at the horizon as if the sun were something he could never quite reach. "You read it, didn't you?" he said without looking at her. She hesitated. "I did, I'm sorry." He nodded, still not meeting her gaze. "You don't have to be, it's all true." His voice was steady, but his hands betrayed him, shaking as they picked at the seam of his sleeve. "We were evacuating a clinic after the shelling. I got 4 of my guys out. The building was burning, roof half gone. I went back for Mary. She was supposed to be behind me." He stopped, jaw tightening. She wasn't. She'd gone back inside for a patient, a boy maybe 8 years old. By the time I reached her, the second explosion hit. His words faltered. Scout pressed his head against Ethan's arm, grounding him. "I thought I saw her through the smoke," Ethan whispered, "but I couldn't reach her. I dragged the boy out instead. He lived. She didn't." The wind picked up, rustling the dry grass. Lena swallowed hard. "You did what you could," she said gently. Ethan shook his head. "I was supposed to bring her home. She told me once if I ever had to choose, save the next one. And I did. But she was the one I wanted to save." He stared at the scar on his palm, the faint white line where a shard of glass had cut him that day. "I keep thinking if I'd gone back sooner." His voice trailed off. The thought hung between them, unfinished, sharp as shrapnel. Lena wanted to tell him there was no sooner, no later, not in fire, not in war, but the words felt too small. Instead, she said quietly, "Maybe she'd say you did come back, just not for her." Ethan turned, confusion flickering across his features. Then, for who he asked. Lena looked at Scout, who was watching both of them with unblinking focus, his chest rising and falling in calm rhythm as if he carried an answer neither of them could speak. The siren had long faded, but in its absence lingered a silence that felt heavier than noise, the kind that pressed memory into bone. The October wind had picked up by midnight, scraping tree branches against the old windows like fingers searching for a way in. The old building used to be a military convalescence ward during the Vietnam era and had once served as an asylum. It is now Evergreen Rehabilitation Center. Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his bed, his breath fogging in the chill air that slipped through the crack in the window. Scout lay nearby, one paw twitching as he dreamed a soft whimper caught in his throat. The sound was almost human. Ethan reached down and brushed the dog's ear. "You're dreaming too loud," he whispered, but there was a smile in his voice. Scout shifted and sighed. The moment almost felt normal until the first flicker of light overhead broke the stillness. A sharp pop, then another. The fluorescent bulb near the door sputtered, flashed red, then went dark. Ethan looked up just as the siren screamed to life, high, shrill, and merciless. It tore through the hallway, slicing open the fragile calm that had held him together for weeks. The same pitch, the same rhythm, the same desperate call that had filled the burning air of Fallujah 20 years ago. He froze, heart hammering so hard it felt like the walls were shaking. Scout shot up, barking, muscles coiled. The lights flared again, painting the room in pulses of red. Somewhere down the hall, a nurse shouted instructions, footsteps echoing. Smoke began to seep under the door, thin at first, then thicker, curling like ghosts rising from the floorboards. Ethan's breath hitched. His body moved before his mind caught up, instincts taking over. He dropped to his knees, crawling toward the far corner of the room, the same corner, the same wall. His hands scraped against the cold floor, his lungs pulling shallow breaths as if the air itself had turned against him. Mary. The name ripped from his throat before he realized he'd said it. Scout barked again, circling him, then turned toward the wall, nose pressed against the plaster. The dog began to scratch sharp, frantic strokes that echoed in the small room like hammer blows. The sound of claws on stone made Ethan's skin crawl, but he didn't stop him. He couldn't, because in that wild, feverish moment he wasn't in a hospital anymore. He was in the clinic again, the ceiling sagging, the flames crawling up the walls. The smell of smoke and burned fabric filled his nose. The siren bled into the screams of men he'd tried to save. "She's in there," he murmured, voice trembling. "She's right behind it." Scout let out a low guttural growl and dug harder, his paws leaving streaks of blood on the wall. Lena burst into the room, eyes wide from the flickering red lights. "Mr. Ray," she shouted over the alarm, "you need to get out." The fire's in the main hall. But Ethan didn't move. He crouched lower, pressing his palm against the wall, whispering something Lena couldn't hear. Scout snarled, refusing to step back. When an orderly reached for the dog, Ethan spun his voice, breaking through the chaos. "Don't stop him, he's not crazy, he remembers." His words silenced the corridor for a heartbeat. Even the alarm seemed distant against the force of his conviction. Lena froze, her eyes darting between the man and the animal. Smoke curled higher, stinging her throat. "Ethan, please," she urged, the fire spreading. But Ethan was somewhere else entirely. His gaze locked on the wall, the pulse of the red light flashing across his face like the glow of a burning room. Scout clawed again, a violent flurry of motion, and a faint crack split the plaster. Dust poured down, coating Ethan's hands, sticking to the sweat on his skin. "That's it," he whispered, half to himself, half to the dog. "You found her." Lena coughed, trying to pull him up, but he resisted, eyes wild with memory. The wall groaned a low moan from years of weight pressing against its bones. Another piece fell, then another. Scout barked hoarse and furious, the sound tearing through the hallway like a warning siren of his own. Then came the sharp sound of breaking stone giving way. A section of plaster collapsed inward, sending up a cloud of gray dust. The smell that followed wasn't just smoke, it was old, trapped air, the scent of something long buried, waking for the first time in decades. Ethan stared, chest-heaving, eyes wide as the dust settled. Behind the crumbling wall, darkness waited thick and unmoving. The alarm still screamed, but to Ethan it was far away, drowned beneath the sound of his heartbeat and the echo of Scout's ragged breathing. He reached out, trembling as if afraid the vision would vanish. Scout sat down beside him, chest rising fast, blood on his paws, gaze fixed on the gap in the wall. In that fractured, flickering light, Ethan could swear he heard something move on the other side. A whisper, a shift, maybe just the wind, but it froze him in place, the ghost of a voice that sounded achingly familiar. By dawn, the smell of smoke clung to everything: the walls, the sheets, the skin of those who had been awake all night. Fire crews had contained the short circuit before it reached the patient wings, but the damage left behind felt older than the night itself. The south corridor was cordoned off, its air heavy with dust. Ethan sat on a stretcher near his room, an oxygen mask hanging loosely around his neck. Scout lay beside him, paws, bandaged chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm. Lena stood nearby, her face streaked with soot, eyes still wide from what she'd witnessed. No one spoke. When the firefighters broke open the rest of the wall for safety inspection, what they found silenced even the chatter of the paramedics. Behind the cracked plaster hidden in a pocket of stone sealed by time was a small bundle of fabric, blackened, brittle, but intact enough to recognize the faded floral print of what might have once been a nurse's apron. Wrapped inside was a thin metal badge, its surface dulled by heat, but the engraving still legible: Mary Ray Volunteer Nurse, 1971. One of the firefighters turned to the nurse supervisor and asked, "You have any staff records going back that far?" The supervisor shook her head slowly. This place was closed in the 70s after a fire. They rebuilt over it. Lena stepped closer, reaching for the badge with gloved fingers. The moment she touched it, the metal's chill seeped through the latex, biting her skin. "That's her name," he whispered hoarsely. "My wife's name." The firefighter frowned. It could be coincidence, but Lena's gut told her otherwise. She remembered the file she had read days before the 1971 fire report. A volunteer nurse named Mary Ray remains unrecovered. She crouched beside Ethan, voice trembling but steady. "Mr. Ray, do you know if your wife had family here before?" Ethan blinked, confusion flickering across his tired face. "No, she grew up in Colorado. We met after my first deployment. She never worked here." His hand reached out toward the badge, but Lena held it back gently. "Let me check something first," she said. She took the badge to the office where the ancient computer hummed under the weight of outdated files. The digital archives were incomplete, full of broken links and scanned pages, but after half an hour she found it a list of volunteer staff from the Veterans Medical Unit dated August 1971. Her heart skipped when her eyes caught the name again: Mary Ray, nurse volunteer. The note beside it was brief clinical and final deceased during fire evacuation. Body not recovered. Lena leaned back in her chair, the cold truth settling in her chest. The building Ethan lived in wasn't just a place where he had come to recover, it was the same place where another Mary Ray had died half a century earlier. She printed the record, the ink still damp when she brought it to Ethan's room. He was sitting on the edge of his bed now, Scout's head resting in his lap. His face looked calmer, but his eyes were haunted by something deeper than exhaustion. "You should see this," Lena said, handing him the paper. He took it without a word. His hands trembled as he read, his lips moving silently over the letters. When he reached the line, "body not recovered," he exhaled as if punched. "So she really was here," he murmured. "Not my Mary, but another one who shared her full name." He looked up at Lena, his voice quiet, uncertain. "You think that's who I've been hearing?" Lena hesitated, glancing toward the damaged wall. The air still smelled faintly of ash. "I don't know," she admitted, "but that's not just a coincidence." Ethan rubbed his temple, the confusion pulling him apart from inside. Two Mary Rays, both nurses, both fires, both gone. He looked down at Scout. Both stories were trapped behind a wall. The dog lifted his head, ears twitching at the word waiting. Lena knelt, picking up the badge from the table. The metal caught the morning light and glinted faintly, almost warm. "Maybe someone wanted her to be found," she said softly. Ethan closed his eyes. "Or maybe someone wanted me to remember." A few hours later, when the hall was cleared for repair, Ethan insisted on going back. He walked slowly, Scout limping at his side. The wall had been taped off, the hole covered with plastic sheeting, but through the thin barrier he could still smell it, to the old smoke, the dust, the faint, almost sweet scent of something burned long ago. He reached out, pressing his palm to the covering, feeling the cold air seeping through. "You waited." He whispered the words, lost beneath the hum of the generators. Lena stood a few steps behind him, the badge still in her pocket, the name burning through the fabric like a heartbeat. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the faint ring of an old fire alarm bell, that no one had heard in decades. The hallway lights buzzed softly as evening fell, painting the cracked tiles in a dim amber glow. The fire from the night before had been small controlled, but it left behind a residue of something much larger, an unease that clung to every wall, every breath. Ethan hadn't left his room all day. He sat on the floor by the taped-off section of wall. His knees drawn close, his gaze locked on the faint outline of where the plaster had split. Scout rested beside him, quiet, sensing the heaviness in the air. Lena stood in the doorway, watching him with a kind of helplessness she hadn't felt before. She'd seen soldiers break before seeing them flinch at slamming doors or dissolve at the sound of fireworks, but this was different. Ethan wasn't breaking. He was unraveling slowly, as if the truth had begun to pull the last thread of his restraint. "She was here," he said suddenly, his voice rough, cracking the silence. She waited. The words came out as a cry more than a statement. His hand slammed against the floor, and when he pulled it back, a smear of blood trailed down his palm from a cut reopened by the rough tiles. Scout stirred, whining softly, then pressed his nose against Ethan's hand, licking the wound with slow, deliberate motions. Ethan didn't stop him. "She waited," he repeated softer this time, as if saying it could make it real. Lena stepped forward, kneeling beside him. "Ethan," she said quietly, "you're bleeding." No. He cut her off, shaking his head. "It doesn't matter." He looked at her, then eyes glassy but sharp with memory. "You know what I remember most about that day?" he asked. She didn't answer. He didn't wait for one. "The smell," he said. "It wasn't fire, not really. It was insulation, plastic oil. I smelled it before the sirens, before the shouting. Same smell as last night. I thought I could save them all. I thought that's what I was supposed to do." He paused, swallowing hard. "I got 4 of them out. 4. I kept counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I looked back and saw her silhouette in the smoke. She was still inside. I ran." His voice faltered, breaking apart. "I never made it to her." Scout pressed closer, resting his head on Ethan's leg. Lena reached out, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "You did what anyone would have done," she said. But he shook his head, anger flashing through the grief. "No," he snapped softly, not loud, but sharp enough to sting. "Anyone else might have stopped, but I was her husband. I told her I'd always come back. That's what we said before every mission: you come back or you don't come home, and I didn't come back in time." His breathing quickened again, a tremor running through his shoulders. "She died because I hesitated." The confession hung heavy, raw, and bleeding into the air. Lena hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "You said she went back for a patient," she reminded him. "A child." Ethan nodded, eyes distant. "A boy. I don't even know his name. I carried him out. He lived." His hands clenched into fists. "But every time I close my eyes, I see her in that smoke, and I think if I'd been faster." His voice cracked completely, then the rest swallowed by a sound halfway between a sob and a gasp. Scout whined again, pawing gently at his chest as if urging him to breathe. Lena's heart ached watching him. She'd read 100 case studies on survivor's guilt, but nothing in a textbook captured this, the quiet destruction of a man who had built his life around saving others, only to lose the one person he couldn't. She lowered her voice, almost afraid to disturb the fragile air around them. "Maybe you did save her," she said softly. Ethan looked up sharply, confusion cutting through the grief. "What, maybe she just saved someone else instead?" Lena continued. "You said she went back for that boy. You carried him out. Maybe that was her choice. Maybe she knew you'd save him because she couldn't. Maybe that's how she kept her promise." Ethan stared at her, stunned into silence. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the emergency lights and the distant ticking of a clock somewhere down the hall. Then Ethan exhaled slowly, the air leaving him like surrender. "You think that's what she wanted?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Lena nodded. "I think she wanted you to keep doing what you do, saving people." Ethan turned back to the wall, his fingers tracing the outline of the cracks. "She used to say," that he murmured, "that saving one life means the world still has a reason to keep turning." His throat tightened. I guess I stopped believing her. Scout shifted closer, pressing his weight against Ethan's side solid and warm. Lena watched as Ethan rested his head against the wall, his breath slowing, the tremor easing just slightly. Somewhere in the distance, a branch brushed against the window, its scratchy rhythm almost like a heartbeat. The next afternoon, sunlight slanted through the corridor windows in long, golden bars, cutting across the dust that still floated from the night of the fire. The smell of plaster and burnt paint lingered, faintly sharp but strangely familiar. The maintenance crew had cordoned off the south wing, but Lena had convinced the supervisor to let her and Ethan take a closer look at the damaged wall before repairs began. Ethan stood beside her sleeves, rolled up his hands, bandaged but steady. Scout patted quietly at his heel, his paws wrapped in fresh gauze. For the first time in weeks, Ethan looked less haunted and more determined, as if the night before had burned away not only the plaster but also the fear that had kept him chained to silence. Lena handed him a flashlight. "We'll only take a look," she said, glancing over her shoulder towards the nurse's station. 10 minutes. They think it's just structural." Ethan nodded, already pulling at the loose edge of plaster where the wall had cracked. The first few pieces came off easily, crumbling like ash under his fingers. The deeper layers were tougher, older brick mortar, a patchwork of time. Each scrape of the chisel echoed through the hallway like a heartbeat. Scout sat near the wall, head tilted, eyes following every movement, tail thumping once against the floor, when a particularly large piece fell away. Lena leaned in, holding the light close to the newly exposed brick. "There's something written here," she murmured. Ethan brushed away the dust, squinting. The faint trace of white paint glimmered in the beam, 2 letters uneven but unmistakable. "Mr." he said quietly, almost reverently. His throat tightened. Her initials. Lena ran her fingertips along the edge of the letters, the paint flaking under her touch. This must have been from the original structure. "Look here, there's more." She pointed toward a lower section of the wall where the surface darkened with soot. Underneath, lines of faint writing emerged, messy and uneven, etched in what looked like charcoal. Ethan crouched, heart hammering. He traced the words slowly, reading aloud as if afraid to break them. "To whoever comes back, save the next one." The hallway went still. Even the hum of the lights seemed to pause. Lena felt a chill rise along her arms, despite the warmth of the afternoon. She wrote that Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. She must have used charcoal from the fire, and later paint sealed the surface during renovations, which is why the words survived. His hand shook as he brushed over the words again. She wasn't calling for help. She was leaving a message. Lena swallowed hard, her eyes softening. "Maybe for you." He nodded, eyes wet but clear. "Maybe for me, or for anyone like me." His voice cracked on the next words. "She wasn't waiting for me to save her. She was telling me to keep saving others." The realization hit him like a wave, both mercy and pain tangled together. Scout shifted closer, pressing his body against Ethan's side. The dog's nose touched the base of the wall, sniffing once, twice, then again, more slowly this time, before lowering his head to the ground. He exhaled a long, deep breath and stayed there, still calm, as though settling beside something he finally understood. Ethan rested a trembling hand on Scout's back. "She's not waiting," he said softly, his gaze fixed on the words. "She was telling me to keep saving." His voice steadied as he spoke, growing firmer with each syllable. Lena turned her face toward the open space, blinking back the sting in her eyes. "She knew you'd find it," she said quietly. "No one else could have." Ethan let out a faint, breathless laugh that sounded almost like a sob. "She always knew where to leave a trail," he murmured. "When we worked together overseas, she'd write reminders on walls so I wouldn't forget supplies or patience. She'd say walls never forget, even when people do." He looked at Lena. Guess she was right. They stood there for a long moment, the sunlight shifting slowly across the floor, the words on the brick glowing faintly in the light. The hallway, once just another sterile corridor, now felt alive, like something breathing, remembering. Ethan reached up, brushing away the remaining flakes of dust from the initials, his fingertips tracing them with quiet reverence. "I thought she needed me to come back for her," he said, his voice low. but she just needed me to come back." Scout lifted his head eyes, meeting his master's, and gave a quiet sound, something between a sigh and a low rumble, almost approving. The sound echoed softly through the hollow space, blending with the whisper of the wind outside. Lena stepped back, her gaze still fixed on the message. "We should document this," she said. Ethan nodded absently, but his attention never left the words. His heart, for the first time in years, felt both heavy and free. Somewhere deep inside the wall, dust shifted again, falling in small, silent cascades, as if the building itself exhaled after holding its breath for half a century. The leaves had begun to turn outside Evergreen Rehabilitation Center, shades of amber and rust trembling in the wind. The building, once a place of confinement, now carried a strange kind of calm. In the weeks since they uncovered the message on the wall, Ethan had changed in quiet but profound ways. He no longer sat by the cracked plaster whispering to ghosts. He walked the corridors with purpose, shoulders straighter, eyes clearer. Lena noticed it first. "You look different," she told him one morning as she handed him Scout's leash. He smiled faintly. Maybe I finally heard what she was saying. That day, Ethan met with the director of the facility, an older man with kind eyes and a clipboard that seemed to weigh more than it should. Ethan asked to stay not as a patient, but as a volunteer. "You want to work here?" the director asked, surprised. "We don't usually hire former patients right after treatment." Ethan nodded. "I'm not looking for a job," he said quietly. "I'm looking for a way to give something back." The director studied him for a long moment before glancing down at Scout, who sat calmly by Ethan's side. "You've got quite the partner," he said. "He's got a gift." Ethan reached down, brushing a hand over the dog's fur. "So did my wife," he said softly. "She taught me that sometimes healing comes from steady hands and quiet hearts." The director nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Let's see what you can do." Within weeks, Ethan became part of the therapy team, assisting sessions for veterans struggling with PTSD. He didn't wear a badge or a uniform, just a plain shirt, rolled sleeves, and the quiet authority of someone who had been there and come back. The other veterans were wary at first. They'd seen him around as a patient, and the rumors had circled for months: the wall, the fire, the outbursts. Some still whispered when he walked in. But he didn't mind. Scout followed him into every room calm and grounded his presence, steadying even the most restless hands. They started with breathing exercises, small routines meant to anchor the mind when panic struck. Ethan demonstrated voice low and measured. "You're not going back there," he said, guiding one young Marine whose hands shook violently. "You're here now. Look at me. Breathe." The soldier tried. Failed, tried again. His breath came in sharp bursts, his body coiled tight as wire. Scout moved forward, then slow and deliberate, placing his head on the soldier's chest. The room went still. The dog's rhythmic breathing filled the space soft and steady. The young man's shoulders began to drop, his pulse slowing as he unconsciously matched the rhythm. Ethan kept his hand on his shoulder. "That's it," he whispered. "Just breathe. You're safe." It was the same technique Mary had taught him years ago in the field, grounding through contact, breath, and presence. She had used it on wounded men who woke screaming from nightmares of fire and loss. Back then, Ethan had thought it was just comfort. Now, he understood it was survival. The soldier's breath steadied and the tremor in his hands eased. Scout stayed pressed against him until the silence no longer felt heavy, but full of something sacred. When it was over, the young Marine wiped his face embarrassed and muttered, "Thanks, man." Ethan just nodded. "You did the work," he said. Scout gave a small wag of his tail, earning a weak laugh from the man. Lena watched through the glass window at the back of the room, her heart tightening. She saw the way Ethan spoke, not as a doctor or counselor, but as someone who understood every scar they carried. The other therapists had training. Ethan had memory. Scout had instinct. Together, they built a bridge between pain and peace. Later that afternoon, Lena found him sitting outside with the Scout, the autumn wind lifting the edges of his hair. "You handled that perfectly," she said. He shrugged lightly. "Mary taught me that," he replied. "When someone's drowning, you don't tell them to swim. You give them something solid to hold on to. Scout nudged his knee as if agreeing. Ethan smiled, looking down at him. Guess we're the solid ground now, huh? That evening, after the last therapy session, Ethan returned to the south corridor. The message on the wall had been sealed behind protective glass, framed and preserved like a relic. To whoever comes back, save the next one. He stood there for a long time, the light catching the faded words. I did, he whispered. I finally did. Scout sat at his feet, head tilted, ears perked as if listening to something only he could hear. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint echo of distant laughter from the therapy group. A sound that didn't belong to the past anymore, but to the present he had rebuilt. Winter came quietly that year, bringing with it the kind of cold that made the air taste like metal and memory. The center's south corridor had been closed for renovation for weeks, and the hum of drills and scraping of trowels filled the mornings. The administration had finally decided to restore the damaged section not as another sterile white wall, but as a memorial, a space that would carry the names of nurses, medics, and soldiers who had served and never returned. It was Lena's idea, but Ethan was the one who asked to do the work himself. It was her wall, he said simply. The director had agreed. And so each afternoon, while the rest of the building hummed with routine, Ethan came to that quiet hallway with his sleeves rolled up and a bucket of mortar by his side. Scout followed every day, settling at the corner of the corridor where sunlight pooled through the high window, his eyes tracking every movement of Ethan's hands. Ethan moved slowly, laying brick upon brick, steady and deliberate. Each stroke of the trowel was a kind of prayer. He remembered the first time he had touched this wall, shaking, broken, whispering to a ghost he thought would never answer. Now, the same wall stood open before him, waiting to be rebuilt, not as a tomb, but as a monument. Lena often came to check on him, bringing coffee and small smiles. You're good at this, she said one afternoon, watching him smooth the mortar with the back of his hand. He smiled faintly. You learn patience when you've spent your life trying to fix things you can't. He paused, pressing a brick into place. At least this I can mend. As the days passed, Ethan began inscribing initials onto the lower row of bricks letters he remembered from faded plaques, hospital rosters, old rosters Lena found in the archives. MR came first, then others. J. H. E. Palmer D. Larson. Names of medics and volunteers who had worked in the field hospitals during the war years, people whose stories were written only in the margins of forgotten files. When Lena saw what he was doing, she didn't stop him. She just brought more chalk. The wall, once a scar, became a tapestry of remembrance. Each name was a heartbeat returned to the world. One afternoon, as the final section neared completion, Ethan worked in silence while Scout dozed nearby, his tail twitching with every scrape of the trowel. The hallway was empty except for the sound of Ethan's breath and the quiet rhythm of his labor. He set the last brick, carefully pressing it into the mortar until it held firm. Then, as he leaned back to inspect the line, he felt something nudge his arm. Scout had gotten up and stepped closer. The dog's paw brushed the edge of the wet mortar, sinking just slightly into the surface. Ethan froze, then laughed softly. Guess you wanted your name there too, huh? He said, his voice carrying a warmth that hadn't existed there before. Scout looked up at him with calm amber eyes, tail swishing once against the floor. The single paw print sat at the corner of the wall, pressed into the fresh mortar, small but indelible. Ethan left it there. When Lena arrived later and saw it, she smiled. It's perfect, she said. Every wall needs a guardian. Ethan ran his hand over the drying surface, tracing the print with his fingertips. He's earned it, he murmured. We both have. For a long while, neither spoke. The late afternoon light spilled across the new bricks, soft and golden, catching the faint chalk marks of the names before fading towards dusk. Scout lay down again near the base, head resting on his paws, watching as if guarding the souls written there. As the last rays of sun touched the letters, Mr. Ethan whispered under his breath, You're not gone. You're everywhere here. He pressed his palm to the wall, feeling the faint warmth of the drying mortar beneath his skin. It was strange how a wall that had once held him prisoner now felt like release. He thought of Mary's message, saved the next one, and realized that maybe she hadn't meant one person at all. Maybe she meant every person who came after. Every life pulled from the edge. Every wall was rebuilt. The next morning, the staff gathered to see the finished section. They stood quietly as Ethan explained the memorial's purpose, his words simple, unpolished, but sincere. These bricks, he said, they're not just walls, they're promises. Promises that what we lose still finds a way to hold us together. No one clapped. They didn't need to. The silence that followed was enough a silence that spoke of respect, of gratitude, of healing. As people drifted away, Ethan stayed behind cleaning his tools, the smell of lime and dust clinging to his hands. Scout remained beside the wall, eyes half closed, content. The paw print had begun to dry, hardening into permanence, the only mark not smoothed or shaped by human hands. Ethan looked at it and smiled to himself, knowing that some marks weren't meant to fade. Spring came early that year, the kind that painted even the old rehabilitation center's stone walls in gold. The air was clear and bright, carrying the smell of wet soil and fresh grass from the courtyard. The memorial wall stood finished now, polished and framed by light, its bricks no longer the color of ash, but of quiet warmth. The names carved into it gleamed faintly in the morning sun. Near the bottom, still visible and untouched, was the single paw print pressed into the mortar, the signature of a guardian who had refused to leave his post. Ethan stood before the wall scout sitting beside him, the leash resting loose in his hand. The corridor behind them had changed too. Where once there had been silence and fear, now there was laughter, the low murmur of voices, the rhythm of boots and sneakers against clean tile. Veterans from the therapy group were gathered around sitting on mats with their therapy dogs. Ethan led the session, his voice calm, steady, patient. "In through your nose," he said. "Hold it for 3 seconds. Then out." He moved among them, correcting a stance here, a shoulder there. "You don't have to fight the noise," he told them. "You just have to learn it's not the same sound anymore." The young Marine, who once had panicked in his first session, now sat cross-legged with a Labrador, resting its head on his lap, breathing slow and even. Lana watched from the doorway, her clipboard forgotten in her hands. She saw what the others saw. The man who had once come here broken was now the one teaching them how to stay whole. Scout shifted closer to Ethan, sitting tall, eyes half closed in contentment. Outside, a siren began to rise, distant at first, then growing louder as a fire truck passed through the nearby street. Several of the veterans flinched. One dropped his shoulders, pressing his palms to his knees. Another's breath caught halfway. Ethan lifted a hand, calm, commanding. "It's all right," he said softly. "It's just the city. It's just life moving on." He didn't turn toward the window. He didn't need to. He closed his eyes instead, inhaled deeply, and let the sound pass through him without resistance. Scout followed his lead, tilting his head toward the siren ears, twitching once, before he gave a single bark, loud, clear, full of life. The sound echoed down the corridor, strong and steady. The veterans looked up startled, then smiled. A few even laughed. The tension melted away as quickly as it had come. Lena exhaled, feeling the weight in her chest ease. Ethan opened his eyes and met Scout's gaze. "Good boy," he whispered. Scout's tail thumped against the floor once, twice, like punctuation. The siren faded into distance, replaced by the soft chatter of birds outside and the rustle of early spring wind through the open windows. Ethan turned back to the group. "You see," he said, voice gentle, "the world doesn't stop for our memories, but it doesn't erase them either. We just learn to walk beside them." A quiet settled over the room, not empty but full. It was the quiet of people who understood. After the session ended, the veterans filed out one by one, pausing to pat Scout on the head or thank Ethan with small nods that carried more meaning than words. When the hall was empty, Ethan remained standing before the wall. The morning light shifted higher, spilling over the bricks until it reached the place where he had carved his final line. The letters were simple, uneven, written by hand and set into the wet plaster weeks earlier for Mary and for every promise that took too long. He traced the words with his fingertips, feeling the faint roughness where the mortar had dried. The air was warm on his face, filled with the hum of life returning to a place that had once felt forgotten. Lena joined him, standing silently for a moment before speaking. "You kept your promise," she said quietly. Ethan smiled faintly. "Took me long enough," he replied, "but I think she'd forgive that." Scout looked between them, then leaned his head against Ethan's leg. "He remembers too," Lena said, smiling. "He always does," Ethan murmured. He gave the leash a gentle tug. "Come on, buddy." They started down the corridor together, the same one that had once echoed with his screams, now alive with light and footsteps. As they walked, sunlight filtered through the high window, catching on the faint crack that still ran through the wall's surface, a scar left on purpose, a reminder that even mended things carry truth in their flaws. The light passed through it like a narrow beam, stretching across the hall until it landed softly on Ethan's shoulder. He paused, looking back once more. The memorial wall glowed under the morning sun, the paw print and the hand-carved line side by side, two signatures of the same story, one written by the living one, left by loyalty that outlasted words. The sirens outside faded completely, replaced by the steady rhythm of city life cars whined the faint call of children in a park somewhere beyond the gates. Ethan turned away, his steps quiet but certain. Scout trotted beside him, head hightail sweeping lightly through the air. Together they walked toward the door and into the sunlight. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't look back. If this story spoke to you, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps bring more stories like this to life. Which moment stayed with you the most? Was it when Ethan found Mary's message, or when Scout left his paw print on the memorial wall? Share your thoughts below and tell us where in the world you're watching from.